C'est une route qui va quelque part, nous emmènera. Questa strada che va da qualche parte ci porterà. I giardini che saranno Omawada, Inakenames. Questa strada che va da qualche parte ci porterà. I giardini che saranno Omawada, Inakenames.
Good morning. I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce this event dedicated to the Egyptian perspective on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD. This webinar has been proposed by the Egyptian Embassy in Rome, taking into account the past experience of the Center of African Studies in Turin on this specific issue, and in general on issues related to the so-called water diplomacy, regarding the shared management of water resources affecting different countries, the livelihood of different populations, and the impact on specific environments. Approximately 2 years ago, the center had already hosted an international event dedicated to the GERD, with the participation of experts of the 3 main countries involved: Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. More recently, on the same issue, on a similar issue, a 4-day seminar had been held regarding the different issues regarding the Lake Chad, spanning from the environment to security. Having rather recently served as Italian ambassador in one of the 3 main countries involved in the project of the GERD, I am fully aware of the great sensitiveness of the issue for all countries involved because of its important economic and political consequences and implications. A dialogue has been in course for years, and now is under the auspices of the African Union. Our only intent as a think tank is to offer an open platform available to all parties where they may feel free, confident to expose their points of views to the public opinion and the experts alike. This same platform will obviously remain available also to the other parties, which we would be happy to host in the next future. I leave the floor to the Ambassador of Egypt, His Excellency Hisham Badr.
Buongiorno. Buongiorno a tutti. Grazie, Presidente Rosso. Thank you very much, President Rosso. And I'd like to thank at the outset the Turin Center for African Studies for hosting this important webinar and the importance that the center attaches to all African issues and issues of international peace and security. And we'd like to partner with you in explaining our perspective on this important issue that affects the livelihood of 100 million Egyptian people and affect also regional peace and stability and security. As you know, and it has been said often, that Egypt is the gift of the Nile, that the water is the source of all life in our planet, but for Egypt and its 7,000 years old civilization has been attributed to the Nile River. And our dependence on the Nile for our livelihood and the well-being of over 100 million Egyptians cannot be at this stage overstated or over-magnified. However, as we are focused today, we have witnessed that in the last decade, since Ethiopia unilaterally announced the commencement of the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD, Egypt has engaged in extensive negotiations on this project. Egypt's objectives in these negotiations were twofold. First, it supported Ethiopia's quest to achieve its developmental objectives for generating hydropower from the GERD. So that from the first moment, Egypt has wanted to guarantee that for Ethiopia. And second, it sought to minimize the adverse effects of this project on Egypt's water uses. This reflects Egypt's unwavering commitment to support its fellow Nile Basin states to pursue economic growth and development, including by harnessing the resources of the Nile River through waterworks and hydropower projects, while ensuring that projects undertaken by upstream Nile Basin states do not impinge on the interests and water needs of Egypt. The most salient fact driving Egypt's policies in this regard is the reality that Egypt receives 97% of its water from the Nile River. Accordingly, Egypt is especially vulnerable to upstream water projects that would cause significant harm to its water uses, which would have immense political and socio-economic costs on Egypt. In turn, this could have serious repercussions on regional stability and security. Regrettably, Egypt's goodwill has not been reciprocated by Ethiopia. Instead, we found that Ethiopia has adopted a policy of obstructionism. It has sought to establish a fait accompli and appears determined to complete the construction of the GERD and to fill and operate this dam, even if it is to the determinant of the interests of its downstream co-riparians. Reflecting on the countless rounds of negotiations and discussions that could have taken place over the last 10 years, my friend, we've been negotiating over the last 10 years, not 10 months, 10 years. This leads us, unfortunately, to the conclusion that the GERD is part and parcel of an Ethiopian policy intent on achieving hydrohegemony over the Nile Basin. Nonetheless, Egypt has engaged and continues in a spirit of good faith in countless rounds of negotiations. We sought an agreement through trilateral talks and through inviting regional and international partners, such as the United States and the African Union, to participate in these negotiations. But these efforts were unsuccessful. In each of these fora, and despite our best efforts, we were unable to reach an agreement because of Ethiopian positions. For instance, last year, intensive negotiations were held with the participation of the United States and the World Bank that led to the articulation of a comprehensive agreement on the filling and operation of the GERD, which provided a formula that preserved the rights and equities of all three riparian states. While Ethiopia rejected this agreement, Egypt initialed it in a show of good faith and in a demonstration of its commitment to reach a fair and balanced agreement on the GERD. Then, starting in May 2020, a round of negotiations was held upon the invitation from His Excellency the Prime Minister of the Sudan, which regrettably did not yield the desired agreement. This was followed by the session held by the UN Security Council on the questions of the GERD, which demonstrates the recognition by the international community of the seriousness of this issue and the necessity of reaching an amicable solution that prevents the further destabilization of an already troubled region. Finally, since late June 2020, we have been negotiating under the auspices of the African Union. Unfortunately, this process also has not led to any fruition. Throughout this, Ethiopia has adopted an unrelenting policy of unilateralism. This was manifested in the summer of 2020, when Ethiopia unilaterally impounded 4.5 billion cubic meters of water in uncoordinated manner, which caused immediate damage to Sudanese water stations and hydropower facilities. And now we are facing the imminent peril of the second stage of filling of the GERD, which is due to commence in mid-2021. Executing this second stage of the filling will cause serious harm to Egyptian and Sudanese interests, and therefore it is necessary to reach an agreement on the filling and operation of the GERD. This is a legal obligation, this is a hydrological necessity, and this is a technical requirement. Today, dear friends, we have with us the Egyptian negotiating team, which will provide an overview of the negotiations of the GERD and highlight Egypt's efforts to reach a fair and balanced agreement on this project. They will discuss the outstanding legal and technical issues and demonstrate how Egypt, beyond a shadow of a doubt, has worked tirelessly to reach an agreement on the GERD that would herald a new era of cooperation in our region. President, distinguished professor, ladies and gentlemen, we have today a distinguished panel of experts that will deliver further into the details of this sensitive issue and dilemma. It is a great honor to present you today with my dear friend and colleague and one of Egypt's most able diplomats, Dr. Mohammed Hilal. Dr. Hilal is a counselor at the cabinet of the Egyptian foreign minister and a visiting associate professor and John Harvey Graduate Lecturer on World Organization in the Harvard Law School, as well as being an associate professor of law at the Moritz College of Law in Ohio State University. Dr. Hilal will give a more detailed overview of the negotiations on the GERD and key takeaways. It's also my great pleasure to present our second speaker, Professor Dr. Hisham Bekhit, Professor of Hydrology at the Faculty of Engineering in Cairo University, who will speak to us about the technical aspects of the negotiations. Thank you very much for listening. And with your permission, sir, I would now like to give the floor to Dr. Mohammed Hilal. Please.
Grazie mille, Ambasciatore, and thank you, of course, very much to the organizers of today's session. It really is a pleasure and a privilege to be here. We're also looking forward to your questions, to your comments. For us, this is supposed to be a conversation. We really are looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas about how we can achieve a breakthrough in these talks. So once again, thank you for joining us. We really do look forward to your questions. With your permission, I'm going to be sharing a screen here very quickly so that, well, I'm attempting to share a screen. There seems to be some technical trouble here, but I guess what we can do is perhaps do it this way. All right, let's do this. So can you see my screen? Can you see a screen right now, or all right, so it appears that we can't, it seems that you're not able to see the screen, but anyway, so let us proceed without the screen. That's perfectly fine. So basically, this is the way that we're going to divide our presentation today. I'm going to walk you through an overview of the negotiations that have been undertaken over almost a decade of time, since 2011. When Ethiopia commenced the construction of this dam until today, when we are about 130 days from the second filling of the GERD. And then I'm going to outline the basic tenets of Egypt's position throughout these negotiations. I'm going to try to explain to you how Egypt worked tirelessly to try to achieve a fair and balanced agreement on the GERD that preserves the rights of all three countries, that enables Ethiopia to achieve its developmental objectives while preserving the rights of the downstream states and minimizing the downstream impacts of this dam. So that's basically what I'm going to cover. And then my colleague, Dr. Hisham Bekhit, who's going to speak after me, is going to share with you some of the technical information and some of the technical details in these negotiations. And he's going to do that to show you how Egypt worked to present various proposals all of which were designed to achieve a win-win solution that guarantees Ethiopia that it will be able to generate hydropower efficiently and sustainably while minimizing the downstream effects of this dam. And then afterwards, I'm going to come back with just a very brief outline of some of the outstanding legal issues in this talks. All right, so let's get started. And as I said, I'm going to take you through a very brief outline of 10 years worth of negotiations. So as you all know, this dam, which is going to be the largest hydropower facility in Africa, began in 2011, specifically in April of 2011, when Ethiopia announced unilaterally its intention to commence the construction of the GERD. And in fact, Egypt learned about the GERD from the news media when Ethiopia had a major celebration for the groundbreaking of this dam. Unfortunately, with a dam of this size, what we have is a situation where Ethiopia did not notify the downstream states. It did not coordinate with the downstream states. It did not consult with the downstream states on this project. This, of course, is a very serious violation of international law, which requires states to consult with their co-riparians, to notify their co-riparians of projects, particularly projects of this size and of this nature that would have a major impact on the riparian system. So despite the fact that Ethiopia had not consulted with its co-riparians, we engaged in a process of negotiations which led to the establishment in 2012 of something called the International Panel of Experts, which we refer to as the IPOE, the International Panel of Experts. Now, this was a panel that was composed of 4 international experts, in addition to 2 experts from each of the 3 countries, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Now, this commission, this group of experts met for an entire year, and they came out with a report in May of 2013 that was deeply disconcerting. It was a very serious report that cast serious doubt over certain aspects relating to the safety and structural stability of this dam. It cast doubt over the studies that were undertaken to determine the hydrological impact of this dam. It noted that there were virtually no studies on the socioeconomic effects of this dam, and there was no environmental impact assessment of a project of this nature. Of course, these were incredibly disconcerting, very concerning findings by the report. The report also made several recommendations regarding the stability of the dam, its safety, and the nature of its location. There were various studies relating to the geotechnical specifications of the dam and its location. So it was a dam that it was a report that reflected that this was not a dam that was studied perfectly, that was not prepared in a manner that was consistent with international best practices. And of course, for a country like Egypt, which, as the ambassador mentioned, is entirely dependent on the Nile, this was incredibly disconcerting. We were deeply concerned that this was a project, a mega dam, the size of which will be the largest in Africa, was being constructed with absolutely no concern, with absolutely no attention to the interests of the downstream riparians. And so it appears we have the slide up here right now. So again, these are the main milestones in this process of negotiations. As I said, in 2013, the IPOE report was issued, and that report, as I said, included a series of recommendations. Some of its most important recommendations were that the 3 countries have got to conduct socioeconomic studies on the socioeconomic effects of the dam, studies on its impact on the hydrological system and on the riparian ecosystem, and also an environmental impact assessment. Now, I'm very sorry to report that as of this moment, 8 years later, we do not yet have a report on any impact of the GERD. We have already commenced the filling and operation of the GERD, and yet we have no reports on the impact of the GERD on the downstream states. So this was followed by an attempt to create some political momentum to be able to enable these studies to be conducted. And so the three countries got together and issued the 2014 Malabo Declaration. It was essentially a political statement that reaffirmed their commitment to conduct these studies. And then in 2015, we signed a very important treaty, which is called the 2015 Agreement on Declaration of Principles. So this agreement basically created two major obligations. The first obligation was that it became incumbent on the three countries to conduct the studies that were recommended by the International Panel of Experts. And so now the three countries were under a legal obligation to conclude these studies. And second, the Agreement on Declaration of Principles also required the three countries to agree on the rules governing the filling and operation of the GERD. So why is this important? This is important because this agreement created a legal obligation that is incumbent upon Ethiopia as the dam owner and the dam operator to agree on rules that would govern the filling and operation of the GERD to ensure that it would be undertaken in a reasonable, equitable manner and that it also would not inflict significant harm on the downstream states. Also, there was a collective obligation to ensure that there were studies that were undertaken to be able to record and to scientifically assess the impact of this dam. Again, unfortunately, neither of these two central legal obligations were fulfilled. Neither of these two principles, neither of these two elements of the Agreement on Declaration of Principles were fulfilled. We do not have studies on the effects of the GERD, and we do not have an agreement on the filling and operation of the GERD. And unfortunately, Ethiopia has commenced the filling of this dam and has announced that it will continue the filling of this dam without having any rules that would manage this process. Obviously, this causes this represents a serious threat to the interests of the downstream states. It is a source of imminent peril. It is a cause and source of an imminent threat, particularly for Sudan. And to understand this, you've really got to understand the geography of the region. The most important dam, the most important hydropower facility in Sudan is called the Roseras Dam. And the Roseras Dam is only 120 kilometers downstream of the GERD. And the water that is stored in the Roseras Dam is actually within 15 kilometers of the GERD. And so if the GERD is filled and operated in an uncoordinated manner that does not take into consideration the interests of the downstream states, the impact would be immediate on Sudan and then definitely on Egypt, which is further downstream. And so what we're seeing here is, again, a desire by Ethiopia not to comply with legal obligations, particularly the legal obligations enshrined and codified in the Agreement on Declaration of Principles, and a desire to impose a fait accompli, a desire to establish a reality on the ground and to exercise unfettered control through this dam that is being built on the Blue Nile. And so to try to get over the situation, to try to implement the agreements that were enshrined in the Agreement on Declaration of Principles, the three countries tried to establish a group that was called the NISRG, which stands for National Independent Scientific Research Group. Now, this group is a group of independent scientists. They're hydrologists from the three countries, and their job was to get together to agree on the rules for the filling and operation of the GERD. Now, needless to say, that process did not succeed, and after 5 meetings, the NISRG group failed and basically broke down, at which point the United States invited the three countries to join these negotiations and to become part of an attempt to facilitate the process of reaching an agreement. That process lasted from November of 2019 until February of 2020 and culminated in the drafting of an agreement that Egypt initialed on February 28th, 2020. Now, we can talk further about the content of this agreement, but the most important thing to understand about this agreement is that it was fair, it was balanced, and it was based on a win-win principle. It guaranteed, and I use that term advisedly, it guaranteed Ethiopia that it would generate hydropower at optimum levels. It would continue to generate hydropower sustainably and efficiently from the GERD in virtually all hydrological conditions. And it would only require Ethiopia to take very limited steps and very limited measures to assist the downstream states in the mitigation of the impacts of certain drought conditions and to mitigate the effects of this dam. And when I say this, it's very important to understand the following. This dam is going to store about 150% of the average annual flow of the Blue Nile. So the Blue Nile annually yields about an average of 49 billion cubic meters. The GERD has a total storage capacity of 74 billion cubic meters. So that's about 150% of the average yield of the river. That means that the impact of the GERD on the riparian system of the Blue Nile could be significant. It could cause a significant disruption to downstream hydropower facilities. It could significantly disrupt agricultural systems in the downstream states. And so what we needed was a system that would coordinate all the existing hydropower facilities. We would need a process that would enable the three countries to collectively adapt to drought mitigation measures. And that's what the Washington Agreement provided. It provided an approach that would establish a commonality. It would establish a mechanism for very close coordination between the three parties. And most importantly, it was based on the principles of equity. It was based on the principles of reasonableness. It guaranteed Ethiopia that it would achieve a return on its investment while minimizing the harm and minimizing the effects of this mega project. And so because Egypt felt it was a fair and balanced agreement, we accepted it and we initialed it as a show of good faith. However, our colleagues in Ethiopia unfortunately rejected this agreement and decided to essentially walk away from that process. And then in the following months, His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Sudan, launched a process of negotiations. Unfortunately, that did not lead to any results. Then we had a UN Security Council session. And then finally, we've been engaged in a process of negotiations that is facilitated by the African Union since mid-2020, but unfortunately that has not led to fruition. So that's a very brief overview of these negotiations, and then I'm gonna very quickly walk you through a set of basic principles that have always guided Egypt's approach in these negotiations. So the first principle that we have consistently adopted in Egypt is this. For Egypt, we have been unwaveringly committed to supporting Ethiopia's right to development. We have consistently recognized that as a co-riparian, Ethiopia has an inalienable right to utilize the resources and riches of the Blue Nile, that Ethiopia has an unalienable right to develop and to build waterworks and to exploit the resources of the Blue Nile. The only requirement is to do so within the confines, within the principles, and in accordance with the principles of international law. And on the basis of the broad principle of the equality of right and the community of interest. For us, this is a central tenet of our approach in dealing not only with Ethiopia, but with all of our colleagues and all of our neighboring countries in the Nile Basin. The principle is to approach the Nile as an unbreakable bond of kinship between the three countries and to try to find agreements and understandings on these projects that would ensure that all our countries would be able to benefit equally from this resource. And so that brings me to the second principle. Ultimately, we approach the issue of the GERD on the basis of trying to reach an agreement based on two principles: benefit sharing and burden sharing. Benefit sharing and burden sharing. So what does that mean? In terms of benefit sharing, the idea was to design an agreement, was design a process that would guarantee Ethiopia that it would be able to generate hydropower from the GERD in all hydrological circumstances and all hydrological conditions, and my colleague Hisham Bechit is going to present more about this in detail. However, every proposal that Egypt has presented, every model that Egypt has presented was based on guaranteeing that even during the worst periods of drought, Ethiopia would be able to generate hydropower from the GERD. In fact, Egypt proposed, and in fact, Egypt accepted the filling schedule presented by Ethiopia, and Egypt accepted the optimal operational rule proposed by Ethiopia. However, in return, what Egypt had been asking for is an agreement on certain mitigation measures that would limit the effects of this dam on downstream states. Because for us, everything is a quid pro quo. The agreement has to be balanced and fair in the sense of it guarantees that Ethiopia would achieve the benefits it's looking for, while on the other hand, minimizing the effects of this dam on downstream states and enabling the three states to collectively and cooperatively manage the riparian ecosystem and manage the different hydrological conditions. And so that brings me to what we have found in return. Unfortunately, throughout this process, what we have found is unrelenting Ethiopian unilateralism throughout this process. And this has been truly disheartening. What we have found is that Ethiopia did not notify the downstream states. It did not consult with the downstream states. It failed to undertake the required environmental impact assessment to determine the environmental effects of this dam. Ethiopia failed to conduct studies on the downstream economic, social, and hydrological impacts of this dam. Ethiopia failed to present the downstream countries with any study on the effects on the riparian ecosystem of this dam. And then throughout this process, what we have found, unfortunately, that Ethiopia has been intending to operate and fill this dam unilaterally with almost no consideration for the interests of downstream states. And this is despite the fact that Egypt provided multiple solutions that would have preserved the interests of Ethiopia. For instance, we proposed what is called a multi-reservoir operation. This is a process in which the main hydropower facilities along the Blue Nile, particularly the GERD and the High Aswan Dam, would be placed within a comprehensive regime and a comprehensive system of co-management, where the two main dams would be able to operate in cooperation with each other, and they would be able to cooperatively adjust to the different hydrological conditions of the Blue Nile, and they would also be able to adjust to conditions such as climate change and other changes in the riparian ecosystem. Again, Ethiopia did not want to establish that kind of cooperative relationship with Egypt. Second, Egypt also suggested what we call a multi-layered drought mitigation measure that would enable the two countries to adjust to the changing hydrological conditions. Again, Ethiopia rejected that. And instead, Ethiopia unilaterally filled the GERD, or executed the first stage of the GERD, which, as the ambassador mentioned, involved the impounding of 4.9 billion cubic meters, which caused an immediate impact and an immediate effect on Sudan. And moreover, Ethiopia is intending to fill the second stage of the filling process, and it is intending to impound 13.5 billion cubic meters in the summer of 2021. And just think about that number for a moment. 13.5 billion cubic meters, that is about 27% of the average flow of the GERD. It is 3 times as much water as was stored last year, and the impact of that filling, which is in the summer of 2021, which is about 130 days away, could be catastrophic, particularly on Sudan, but also in Egypt. And that is where we are today, and that is why we have what I would essentially call really an imminent danger, a clear and present danger for the downstream states. That is why it is absolutely imperative that we reach an agreement within the next 130 days. This is a situation which is no longer limited to a technical debate or a question over or different interpretations over existing agreements or not. This is now a political matter that affects the core national security interests of the two downstream states. We are hopeful, we are We are hopeful that we can reach an agreement in the coming 3 months. But it takes two to tango. We need a serious and engaged party and a partner that has the political will to reach an agreement and that is prepared to approach this issue with a mentality and with an attitude and a posture that is based on these twin principles of benefit sharing and burden sharing, which is designed to ensure that Ethiopia achieves its developmental objectives while mitigating and minimizing the downstream harm of this dam. So I'm going to stop here for the sake of time and then turn it over to Dr. Hisham Bakhid, who's going to walk us through some of the technical aspects of these negotiations. So over to you, Doctor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hilal, for the floor. So allow me to share my screen, if you please. I'm going very quickly to highlight some issues, some of the technical issues regarding the GERD negotiation. So before doing that, I prefer just to give you some background on the Nile and the water and why the GERD is a problem. So very quickly, for those who are not familiar with the hydrology of the Nile every year receive rainfall about 2,100 billion cubic meter. And among this huge amount of rainfall, unfortunately, only about 4% of runoff that's reached to Sudan and Egypt, which make the about 84 billion cubic meter. And the Blue Nile, which is here on the right-hand side, is contributing about 49 billion cubic meter from these 84. So this is a huge amount from all the yield of the water reaching for Sudan and Egypt. So that's why the Blue Nile has this kind of importance. Going back to Egypt side, where is the problem from the Egyptian side? If you look to Egypt, and according to the FAO Aquastat, Egypt is the most driest country in the world, where we do not receive any rainfall in huge amount. As you can see here, the map of rainfall, practically speaking, from Cairo all the way south, where the rainfall drops to zero. This is caused the entire country, entire boundary is purely desert, as you can see from this satellite image. And the only life is around the Nile and the valley. So Egypt is only dependent or highly dependent on the Nile with more than 97%. Due to this very stressful water insecurity, we have water shortage about 21 billion cubic meter every year. This is more than 38% of the Nile flow that we are receiving every year. And we handle this water shortaging by reuse. So we are recycling water for more than 3 times, which increase the overall efficiency of water use within the territory of the Egypt. And from the other side, we also have a problem as the water shortages and water insecurity have an implication on the food insecurity, as we only able to cultivate 3.5% from the total land area that we have, which is, if the per capita share for the person is 0.035 hectare per capita. So therefore, we are having $10 billion every year food gap, as we are importing about 60% of our food every year. And this water security and food security have implication on the society, as the people who are working on the agriculture sector are the most vulnerable portion on the society. They are the poorest sector, and the labor, they present about 31% from the labor force, and about 50% from this labor force are female who are taking care with their family. So they are the most fragile system who will be very affected if their only source of life affected. So that's why we are saying the Nile for Egypt is the issue of life. It's an existential issue for Egypt. Shifting the gear, where is a problem with the Grand Incense Dam, the GERD. So GERD reservoir that is have a storage of 74 billion cubic meter that control 150% of the Blue Nile annual flow. With having a system, having a GERD and High Aswan Dam that's have a storage of 162 billion cubic meter, it is unprecedented combination of 2 major large dams with total capacity that's 280% of the average natural flow, and there is no agreement or no coordination in place between these two dams. It is unprecedented case in the world. You can look in all the cases in the world, you will not find such a bizarre situation like what we have right now. So with this, having this in mind, and if we shift it to what will this cause if we do not have an agreement between these two large dams. This is on the left-hand side, the flow time series of the Blue Nile. As you can see, the Blue Nile has a phenomena called Hearst phenomena, where we may have a period of drought consecutive every like 7-10 period, like the period highlighted in this box, red box. So if we have something like that repeated without the dearth, the downstream country and especially Egypt will have a water shortage about 53 billion cubic meter over 4 years. So can you imagine if the filling of the dearth coincide with the drought period and you need to fill like 74 billion cubic meter? With that, the total water shortage could reach more than 128 billion cubic meter for a period of 5 to 7 years. So this really needs a cooperative strategy that can mitigate these kind of extreme drought between these two large dams. And without this kind of cooperation, the impact of the dearth will be huge. So just to show you the spectrum of these impacts, the first and foremost impact from dearth on the downstream is the impact on the resilience of High Aswan Dam. So in order to fill dearth, you have to divert a lot of water from the Blue Nile to fill the dearth. This will reduce the amount of water going to downstream, and accordingly, Egypt will use the water stored in High Aswan Dam to mitigate for the water use, which will reduce dramatically the resilience of High Aswan Dam. This resilience that's are used during the drought period, so it will have a lot of problem facing the extreme impacts, and will cause the system to go in artificial drought, which will, if it occur having drought, this will reduce the agricultural production, reduce irrigation area, and a lot of people will losing their income. So it's kind of a chain reaction that will result from these water shortages. And also it will decrease the water surfaces and adversely impact the shallow groundwater. So all this kind of impacts if the water having a water shortage in the downstream. On the other side, also from the problem of the dearth, the unilateral action that Ethiopia have been doing in the Nile. As you were aware about the first filling, where Ethiopia unilaterally filled 4.9 billion cubic meter, although last year was one of the very wet years. However, due to lack of communications and informations, and due to the unilateral action, this filling caused a lot of water intake in Sudan to be out of the surfaces due to reduction in the water levels. So this kind of lack of information and unilateral action and maybe some mismanagement could lead to serious hazards. Also, the issue of the dam safety is an open question. If you can read the IBUE report, there are a lot of unopened areas and a lot of big question mark about the stability and the geotechnical and the design criteria about this dam and how it will be operated. Other issues from the impact of the dearth is the issues related to the environmental and social aspects. If you look from the perspective of environmental, you will find that the most part from Egypt and the Nile that will be subject to most of the effect is the Delta region. The Delta for Egypt is the highly populated zone, as you can see here from the population density, and it is the lower part of the Egypt. And if the water reduced, so this will cause a lot of soil salinity and a lot of salt water intrusion from the upsides. So this will cause degradation in water quality and also will affect the agricultural area in this zone. So affecting this agricultural area with high population, you can imagine how those people will manage if they lost their income, they lost their job, so they may cause some illegal immigration and a lot of problem in that case. And especially, as my colleague Hilal said, there is unrealized transboundary environmental and social economical impacts due to the lack of studies for this journey. So to quantify these impacts into numbers, according to the international unbiased studies conducted by international firm, they showed that 1 billion cubic meter reduction for Egypt will cause about 290,000 people losing their income, about 130,000 hectares of cultivated land lost, about 150 million increase in food import, about 430 million US dollar agricultural production decrease. So this is kind of the quantification of the impact. And if the GERD is filled unilaterally without taking care of all these kind of impacts, and if this filling coincide with the drought that we are talking about, then this is will be the simulation. The High Aswan Dam will be dramatically dropped to its minimum level where water shortage will occur. And in the other side, GERD will be increasing to the maximum operating level, which will cause these kind of very severe impacts. However, the good things is there is a win-win. As my colleague Mohammed said, we always looking for win-win deal. The deal that balance between two things, between securing water resources and reducing the risk for the downstream states, and also realizing the importance and the needs for development for our brothers and colleagues in Ethiopia, so to generate hydropower efficiency. According to this kind of balance and win-win case, we have presented several proposals to decide this formula, to activate this formula. The first proposal that we presented, as my colleague also showed, is the concept of multi-reservoir operation. So what's in simply what multi-reservoir operation is? This is the map here, High Aswan Dam, here is GERD, and in the middle, the Sudanese Dam, which are very small, that's year-by-year storage, not large reservoir like GERD and High Aswan Dam. So the whole idea behind the multi-reservoir operation is to have the water existing, the available storage exist in the two large dams to be used on optimum way with the coordination between the two dams. In this case, we propose for our colleague to divide the storage into three zones: the prosperous zones above certain critical level, and the alarming zone. When you are reaching this critical level, you have to change your normal operation to some kind of mitigation because you are in a drought. And then the shutdown, the blow shutdown, which is the drought zones where you are dropping very fast and you are losing all the water in the system. So what we are proposing is currently High Aswan Dam at the highest level. So we have a lot of this green zone and GERD is empty. So we can help GERD to be filled very quickly, fast, by cutting a lot of water from the Blue Nile and getting the GERD to be operated. And we will use, instead of the reduced water, we'll use the water in the prosperous zones. So as long as the High Aswan Dam in the prosperous zones, GERD can continue filling with the normal operation. If drought to occur, so we will start first, use the water in High Aswan Dam till we will reach certain level in the critical level. In this case, the GERD will stop filling, reducing their rate of filling, and generate hydropower efficiency, and then fill the water and release it at the end of the day. And in this case, we will be reducing the water in the High Aswan Dam till maybe we reach the complete shutdown, and we will keep GERD in that case operating. With this kind of transformation, we have been offering to have like 60 to 65 billion cubic meter secured from High Aswan Dam to cooperate with the GERD filling during extreme drought. And this will allow GERD to continue filling and generating hydropower. In return, the only things that we are asking, if GERD above certain level and there is a drought, severe drought, so the GERD will be releasing water for the downstream above this level to keep the hydropower generation in the GERD at the most possible efficiency. Unfortunately, this kind of cooperation between the two dams and operating the two dams together were not accepted from our colleague. So we moved to a second proposal with kind of circuit breaker, which kind of borrowed from the economics. So the circuit breaker is to have normal operation, or to have certain crisis, which is due to drought. So we count the drought. If the drought increased with certain portion, then specific mitigation will be applied for the downstream and for the GERD. Unfortunately, this also have been not accepted from our colleague. And we move to the last one that presented in Washington Agreement, which is the multi-layer approach. So the idea of the multi-layer approach is we divided the drought into different zones. As you can see below the 50%, this is the drought area and this is the wet zone. So based on the severity of the drought, is it mild, moderate, severe, extreme, exponential, then certain mitigation will be applied. And according to what we have been agreed during Washington, in the mild and the moderate and severe drought, all the downstream states will take care with their facility. And the only time that we are asking Ethiopia to do something during is extreme drought and exponential drought. So this is only like 2% of the time that's required GERD to do some mitigation for helping the downstream states. In the remaining 98%, they have no issue with this kind of mitigation drought. So unfortunately, this is also still in debate. And to understand this well, this is the GERD level. So the optimum level for the GERD for generating hydropower is at level 625. In this case, they have about 118 meters below the turbines that generate electricity. So what we are asking during the negotiation is if they have water in the zone from 603 to 625, then this is the only time, and there is a drought. We have 4 years with the flow below 37 BCM. As I said, this is only 2% probability. In this case, Ethiopia will release the water above this level in another 4 years. So they have the flexibility to release this, and we are maintaining the level in the GERD at 603. This is like 96 below the turbine level, so maintaining more than 80% of the capacity to generate the hydropower, to maintain more than like 80% from hydropower efficiency. And unfortunately, also this is still did not accept it. That's why we are saying we are looking for this kind of agreement that's built on these 5 ingredients: win-win, comprehensive, equitable, reasonable, based on burden sharing, and must be adaptive and cooperative. By this, I end my what I need to share with you today from the technical perspective. And back to you, Dr. Hilal.
Thank you very much, Professor Bekhit. So I'm told that there are a bunch of questions. I can see them in the chat right now. So, you know, if I may, I can just start right away engaging with these questions. So the first question I can see is that it says, are you saying that Salini is constructing a failing dam? It is absurd. And then the question goes on to say, Article 4 in the DOP, share of water, you do not want to talk about, but you ask us to release from GERD obligatory does not work. So I think let me break up that question into a number of points. So first, let me go back to the issue of the report issued by the International Panel of Experts. And, you know, we're all entitled to our own opinions, but we are not entitled to our own facts. So let me show you the facts. I'm going to show you excerpts from the report of the International Panel of Experts. All right, this is what I'm going to show you now. So this is the report of the International Panel of Experts. I hope you can see it. It is highlighted in yellow, and so this is what it looks like now. As you can see, what I have highlighted in yellow are parts of the report of the International Panel of Experts. So let's see what it says about the dam safety. It tells us the following. The IPOE report found that the design criteria, basic design, it found that this report needs to be updated and detailed, as well as to reflect the prevailing geological, geotechnical, seismological, hydrogeological, hydrological, and hydraulic conditions at the site of the GERD. It was also highly recommended to update the original report to describe the reasons for the changed design, as well as to present design of the changed project components such as the saddle dam, the seepage control, and the spillways. Again, look at part G. It tells you the stability of the main dam and other main structures should be verified under consideration of the additional geological and geotechnical findings. It also tells you, according to the sliding analysis of the factors of safety against sliding along the horizontal lift joints and at the dam rock contact are above the required factors of safety, the sliding stability can be improved by extending the length of the bedded lift joints if needed. The calculated identified subhorizontal discontinuities or joints were not taken into account. Let me scroll down. There are areas of concern, including, quote, the status of the various analyses and design documents, including the level 1 design, in view of the ongoing construction works. This is particularly true for the sliding stability of the main dam and the newly adopted design for the saddle dam and the seepage control measures in its foundation. Let me scroll down. The geotechnical expert group is of the firm opinion that this shear strength is too high to verify the sliding stability of the foundation of the dam when studying and considering the long-term stability of the rock foundation and the residual shear strength. So these are all only a selection of excerpts, a selection of some of the parts of the IPOE report. Imagine if you are living in a downstream state. There are 20 million people in Sudan living immediately downstream of the GERD. There are 100 million Egyptians living about 1,000 kilometers downstream of the GERD. If this is an international report by independent experts, and note, this report was entirely accepted by Ethiopia. Our colleagues in Ethiopia did not contest. They did not reject this report. If you are reading this report, it is only natural that you would be incredibly concerned about the safety and stability of a structure the size of the GERD. Now, the individual who asked the question also asked about Salini. Now, let me be honest. I mean, Salini is a respectable company with projects all around the world. But in Ethiopia, Salini, in a previous location, in a previous dam, namely the Gibe 2 dam, constructed a dam which experienced a dam failure and a construction failure, and actually one of the tunnels within the dam collapsed within 10 days of the beginning of the operation of the dam. That is why we are concerned. All of these comments, all of these areas and questions that were highlighted by the IPOE have not been answered by Ethiopia. That's why we are concerned. It is not only a question of water, it's not only a question of hydropower, it's also a question of survival if there are any doubts or concerns regarding the stability of this dam. So I hope that answers the first question. As I said, we're entitled to our opinions, but we really are not entitled to our own facts. These are the facts as reported by the IPOE. Now, the question also says, it says that you ask us to release, I'm assuming release water from the GERD, and you make that obligatory. Well, again, let's look at the facts. This is what the Washington Agreement required. I'm going to share with you first the text of the Washington Agreement, so we can just basically look at what is required by this agreement. Let's see now. Let's see if we can operate this share screen. All right, let's see now. Okay. So I hope you can see the screen. All right, so this is, let me scroll down to the agreement reached in Washington. This is the agreement reached in Washington. You know, there are no secrets. We are very transparent. We'd like to show you all the documents. And in fact, the agreement was deposited by Egypt in the UN Security Council on June 29th, 2020. So this is the text of the agreement. So let's look at what the agreement actually requires Ethiopia to do. If we scroll down the agreement, if we look at the actual text, here are the technical specifications. This is the mitigation mechanism for drought, and prolonged periods of dry years. Let's look at what the definitions of droughts are. The definition is 37 billion cubic meters in a single year. Then if we have 4 consecutive years with an average of 37 billion, and then for a prolonged period of dry years, it's 4 consecutive years of 40 billion. And then again, with the long-term operation, these numbers are 37, 39, and 40. Okay. Now I realize for the untrained, for the non-specialist, these numbers probably don't make any sense. So I'm going to simplify it as much as possible. The only reason I wanted to show you the numbers is to show you how transparent we are, is that we are showing you the actual documents. This is what was negotiated in Washington. This is what was agreed in Washington. So let's look at what these numbers actually mean and what are the implications for Ethiopia. I hope you can see the graph the graph that I'm sharing with you right now. So it's a graph that shows basically the moving averages of the Blue Nile. Can you see it or not? So let's try this again. Maybe try sharing the screen again. All right, let's try this again. Okay, I hope you can see this screen now. Perfect. So this is so Mike, you know, the respected individual who is asking the question, let's look at what these numbers mean. So again, remember the numbers that I showed you from the Washington Agreement ranged between 37 and 41. If you have a 1-year drought worth 37, if you have 4-year drought worth 40 billion. So let's think about these numbers for a moment. All right. As I said, the average flow of the Blue Nile is 49 billion cubic meters. All right. Egypt did not in any way or form request Ethiopia to take any measures if there is a drought that is worth 48 or 47 or 46 or 45, 43, 44. So in fact, Egypt basically said, because we are seeking an agreement that is based on a win-win principle, an agreement that is based on benefit sharing and burden sharing, we in Egypt said that we will accept the burden of adjusting to any drought that is between 49 billion cubic meters and 41 or 40 billion cubic meters. So in any drought that, even if it's an extended drought for 5, 6, or even 10 years, but where the drought conditions are above 40 billion cubic meters, we are willing to adjust to that burden alone. However, if we have the most extreme forms of drought, including droughts that begin at the threshold of around 41 billion cubic meters, that is when we would require Ethiopia to assist the downstream states because of and to mitigate the impact of the GERD. Now let's look at the numbers that you are looking at. The chance, the possibility, the probability that you would have a 4-year drought, in other words, a prolonged drought, where the average flow is 41 billion cubic meters, is about 7%. This is what this number, you see the number 93.2. What this means is that there is only actually 6.8%. There is a 6.8% possibility that we would have 4 years with an average of 41. Imagine that is the only case in which we are requiring Ethiopia to provide any assistance to the downstream states. We think that's very reasonable. We think that's based on burden sharing and benefit sharing, because only in the most extreme situations, only in the worst type of droughts, that Ethiopia would be required to provide any assistance to downstream states. And then the threshold of 37, which, you know, as you saw, is in the Washington Agreement, the possibility that you would have a drought of that nature has only a 2% chance of occurrence. We think that really is a very fair situation, because what this means is in 98% of situations, Ethiopia would fill and operate the dam in the way that it chooses. It also means when we apply the moving average of 41, that you have a 93.2% of filling and operating the GERD as you choose. This is, from a technical, scientific, hydrological perspective, this is a fair deal. What we are missing is political will. And that's what it comes down to. There is no political will to accept an agreement that is fair, balanced, and equitable. So that's to deal with the first question. Also, I see the first question, it referred to something relating to the 2015 Agreement on Declaration of Principles. Honestly, I don't think I entirely understand the question, because I mean, the agreement is clear. The agreement is crystal clear, and I've shared it here on the screen so that you can see. Again, as I said, we have nothing to hide. These are the facts, these are the texts, these are the documents that are applicable. And if we scroll down, this is Article 1, it requires the 3 countries to cooperate. This is Article 2, and this is very important because it tells you the purpose of the GERD is for power generation. Right? This is a dam that is designed to generate hydropower. And what we in Egypt sought is to ensure that Ethiopia would achieve that objective that is outlined in a treaty that is signed by the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, to generate hydropower. And as you saw from the previous graph, we have guaranteed that Ethiopia would be able to generate hydropower in 98% of cases and in about 93% of cases. And then our colleague who's asking this question refers to Article 4, which refers to the principle of equitable and reasonable utilization, which we have accepted, and we believe that the Washington Agreement and all of our subsequent proposals were based on the principles of equity and reasonableness. But let me also draw your attention to Article 5. This is Article 5, which tells you that the 3 countries agreed on the following. They agreed in the spirit of cooperation to conclude the studies recommended by the IPUE. If you look here, it says that they have to respect the final outcomes of the tripartite national committee and the final report on the joint studies recommended by the IPUE final report. And we were supposed to use those studies on the impact of the GERD to agree on guidelines and rules for the first filling of the GERD, which shall cover all different scenarios. All different scenarios. What this means is all hydrological conditions, whether we have prosperous years with wet conditions with high floods, or if we have droughts or extreme droughts, or what are basically considered harsh hydrological conditions. We are also required to agree on guidelines and rules for the annual operation. And also I want to attract your attention to something very important here. It says, agree on guidelines and rules for the first filling of the GERD, which shall cover all different scenarios in parallel with the construction allowed to continue. And this is a very important point, because Ethiopia has violated the GERD, the DOP, the 2015 agreement, by exercising unilateralism and filling the reservoir of the GERD in 2020, and by its intention to fill the second stage in 2021 in violation, because the agreement says we've got to agree on the rules and guidelines for the first filling while the construction can continue. You can continue the construction, but you cannot fill without an agreement. So I hope I've covered that question comprehensively. I don't know if there are any further questions. So let me look at this at the chat room. I don't know if would the moderator like to ask the questions? Okay, so I'm seeing another question on, please tell me how the first filling of GERD harmed Egypt and Sudan. Well, I think Dr. Hisham Bakhit entirely answered this question, and he showed you specific slides in which multiple water stations, multiple hydropower facilities. Let me put it this way. There are people in Khartoum who lost drinking water because of the filling of the GERD. There are people as far downstream as the capital of Sudan who lost access to drinking water because of the way that the GERD was filled. That is probably the most extreme impact that a hydropower facility such as the GERD can have on a country like Sudan. And in fact, there's also a more dangerous scenario that could happen next year because of the extreme amount of water that is going to be stored, 13.5 billion. It could have a disastrous impact on Sudanese dams. And if it coincides with a drought, it could have disastrous consequences for Egypt. And that's why we're requiring the international community to become engaged in this process and to involve themselves in these negotiations to avert a situation where Sudan and Egypt are affected by this process of the impoundment of waters in the GERD. Let me see if there are other questions. I'm trying to scroll up and down the chat room here. So I can't see any further questions. I don't know, is there the moderator could perhaps ask the questions? Oh, hold on. So I can see another question here that says, I would like to know if there are any prospects for Egypt in case a deal is struck on the GERD to potentially cooperate with Ethiopia and Sudan over the surplus electricity produced by the dam. So absolutely, absolutely. Of course there are. So in fact, you know, this is, Egypt has proposed a number of mechanisms which partially are designed as confidence building measures and also are designed to provide the assurance for Ethiopia that we are willing to cooperate on developmental projects. And in fact, let me show you one of these examples. Again, as I said, I always like to make sure that what I'm showing you are actual texts that were negotiated by the parties. So as I said, this is the Agreement on Declaration of Principles, but also there was an agreement between the three countries in 2018 in what was called the 9-party meeting. All right, so we have a 9-party meeting that includes the ministers of foreign affairs, the water affairs, and the heads of the intelligence agencies of the three countries. In this document, and again, you're seeing the actual document, right? I'm not summarizing it. This is the actual document. In this document, it tells you the three countries agreed to establish a tripartite infrastructure fund, right? And that the three countries were willing to come together and to pool their resources to, in fact, integrate their power grids to ensure that any water lost from the GERD would be substituted for energy and electricity that would be provided by Egypt through an integrated power grid. And this would all be part of a mechanism which we call the Tripartite Infrastructure Fund. Again, unfortunately, what it takes is political will. There is no political will to reimagine the future of the Blue Nile, to reimagine the future of the Nile Basin, and to create a new era of cooperation based on comprehensive integration. That is Egypt's approach. Egypt's vision is to have a Nile Basin that is based on these developmental projects, these mega infrastructure projects that would assist the three countries to integrate their economies, integrate their power grids, integrate their agricultural sectors for the purpose of benefit sharing. Unfortunately, we do not feel that we have an open interlocutor on the other side. So I don't know. Are there any questions coming through? Again, I can't seem to see these questions here.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm just the director from the Center for African Studies, and I will read some of the questions that are on the chat. There is one question from Leanne Forquet. What is GERD impact on the people living in the Blue Nile, and more specifically, what are the consequences on migration in the region, enlarged region? Then there is a question from Professor Salvatore Mancuso that would like to ask how this prolonged lack of agreement might undermine the political stability in the region. This is more general, maybe it's even for the ambassador, I don't know. Then Marta Panzetti from MENA, Political Analysis, asks, are there any perspective for Egypt in case of deal is stuck on GERD to potentially cooperate with Ethiopia and Sudan over the surplus of electricity produced by the dam? These three questions, I don't know if you can answer to this, and then if there are other questions, I will come back.
Grazie mille. So let me try to answer the first question. And, I hope that you could remind me of the questions, because that's 4 questions and I didn't manage to write them all down at the same time. But so the first question related to the impact of the GERD, correct?
Yes, on the GERD, especially when it comes to migration in the region.
Good. So to answer that question, what we need to do is to look at the impacts of the GERD hydrologically, and then we need to see how that impact is going to be translated into socioeconomic effects, and then how the socioeconomic effects get translated into migration issues. So what you see here, again, is a simulation. As I always say, these are the facts, right? This is not an opinion. This is a hydrological model and a simulation that shows you what the impact of the GERD would be on downstream reservoirs. So what you see here is the impact of the filling of the GERD on Egypt. Okay, because also one of the questions was, well, you didn't show us how the filling of the GERD would harm Egypt and Sudan. So the blue line that you can see here is the level of the Aswan Dam in Egypt. And remember, the Aswan Dam is the only source of water for Egypt. So when we say that the amount of water in the Aswan Dam is being reduced, what you're actually seeing is that Egypt is losing the only water it has for its survival. So let's look at what this graph shows us. As the filling of the GERD is executed, and if the filling of the GERD coincides with a drought, you will see the effect that you can see on this graph. The level of the High Aswan Dam will drop dramatically, while the level of the GERD, which is the orange line, would increase progressively. What you see here is that there are several steps or stages in the filling of the GERD. If those stages coincide with a drought, what will happen is that the Aswan Dam will drop very rapidly until within about 4 to 5 years, it would reach a level of 147 meters. If the Aswan Dam reaches a level of 147 meters, that means there's no more water in Egypt. That's basically what it means. It means that the Aswan Dam is no longer able to release water for all purposes, for drinking, for sanitation, for agricultural, for industry. There's virtually nothing in the Aswan Dam because it has reached what is called its water shutdown level. In other words, the outlets of the dam, the water has dropped below them, right? So there's simply no more water in the dam to release to the people of Egypt. And so we would be entirely dependent on whatever water comes in the Nile. And if there's a drought, that means we were going to have very serious circumstances. So what you see here is basically why we are saying we need a drought mitigation measure. A drought mitigation measure would prevent or protect Egypt against this scenario. It would make sure that if there is a drought during the filling, that we basically slow down the filling to prevent this disastrous effect on Egypt. And notice, I said slow down, I did not say stop the filling. And more importantly, and this is very important, even if we slow down the filling, the Washington Agreement and every proposal by Egypt says that this slowing down of the filling will continue to guarantee that Ethiopia will generate hydropower from the GERD. So this is the hydrological impact of the process of the filling. So the question is, how do we translate the hydrological effect of the filling or the operation into socioeconomic effects? And I believe that my colleague, Dr. Hisham Bakhit, pretty much answered this question when he showed you that according to the studies that we have conducted, that if you have a situation where a drought happens and Egypt is unable to fulfill its water needs, if Egypt is experiencing water shortages, every single billion cubic meter of water equals the following costs. You would have 290,000 people losing their incomes. And just think about that for a moment. When we say that 290,000 people losing their income, these people come with families, right? So it's if every family has at least, if it's 4 members per family and they would lose their income, that's automatically about 1 million people. right? That is the danger. That's in fact over 1 million people. That's the danger. And we've calculated it down to the dollar, right? This is the cost. And so immediately there's going to be migration. There's no question about it. Once, if for example, if Egypt loses 2 billion cubic meters of water or 3 billion cubic meters of water, the quantum of impact immediately increases. So that would be 2 million people, 3 million people, 4 million people losing their incomes, losing their only source of livelihood. Automatically that would translate into crime, into migration, and into all kinds of socio-economic effects. So I hope that answers your question comprehensively.
Hello, thank you very much. Yes, that is obviously, and of course, your kindness translating other questions for you. and so there is a question from Shara Hayad. From your perspective, is it yet possible, realistic to move forward in a collaborative manner between the three countries following the 10 years conflict marathon? And then
absolutely, of course there is. All it takes is political will. Let me say this, I am cautiously optimistic. I'm optimistic because from a technical perspective, we can reach an agreement. From a legal perspective, we can reach an agreement. What we need is political will. What we need is to understand, as Egypt has always been saying, that the Nile could be the foundation of a relationship, of a comprehensive partnership between the three countries. And notice here, so our colleagues in Ethiopia often talk about sovereignty, often talk about control over the river, often talk about control over the dam. We understand there's a historical background. We understand that there is a history maybe of mistrust. We have tried so hard to build confidence. We have tried so hard to show goodwill and to show that we are determined to assist in every way we can to have Ethiopia achieve its developmental objectives, one example of which was the infrastructure fund that was agreed but never actually effectuated, never actually launched by the three countries. And more importantly, it's showed in the proposals. As we showed you, the numbers speak for themselves. The facts are self-explanatory. We do not this is not a water sharing agreement. This is not an attempt to control the Nile by any country. It's only an attempt to achieve the benefits of the dam, the benefits of this project, while also mitigating its effects in the harsh hydrological conditions that could happen in the future. So yes, of course, I'm optimistic because the science is there, because the facts are there. That can pave the way to an agreement.
Thank you very much. There are other questions that if you want to take, Lauren Benhamou, do you think that trust-building measures such as exchange of information in water retain and water release at GERD, Ashwan Dam and Rosais Reservoir would help?
Absolutely.
As a visit of technicians of the three parties, technical, especially according to Egypt on Treaty 55. And did you have less than 55 BCM from the Nile since the GERD started to operate with the first filling in 2020? These are questions.
So let me start with the first question. The first filling, see, it all depends on the hydrological conditions. So in the first year, which is basically 2020, the flow of the river, in other words, the amount of water in the Blue Nile was very high. And so Egypt did not experience a shortage of water because of the first year of the filling. But remember, the filling is a multi-year process. It's not a question of a year by year. It's not an issue of, well, let's do 1 year and then look at what happens. We need a comprehensive agreement to manage this complete process because of the simulation I just showed you, right? So if you look at the graph, the amount of water ultimately at the end of the process of the filling depends on the hydrological conditions. That's first. Second, and this is very important, the first stage of the filling in 2020 is the smallest stage. It is 4.9 billion. But then the next stages are huge. It's 13.5 billion, 10.5 billion, 10.4 billion, and then 10.0 billion. In other words, the entire filling process is worth just over 49 billion cubic meters. That is a huge amount of water. And that's why we need an agreement that manages and that organizes and that essentially administers that process of the filling, again, in an equitable manner. We are not, I'm trying to be very clear on this. We are not trying to prevent Ethiopia from filling the GERD. We are not trying to prevent Ethiopia from generating hydropower at all. Every single proposal by Egypt guaranteed that Ethiopia would generate hydropower. However, what we need is an insurance policy that would be applied if there are harsh hydrological conditions to prevent the scenario where Egypt would experience water shortages. So thankfully in 2020, we did not experience water shortages because of the flow of the Nile was very high. But we don't know what's going to happen in 2021. We don't know what's going to happen in 2022 and 2023 and all the way up to 2025 or 26 or whenever the filling is completed. And so we need a regime, we need a mechanism to manage this process. And again, I showed you the result of the simulation. I showed you how the impact of the GERD will impact the water levels in the Aswan Dam. And again, think of the numbers. The filling of the GERD is 50 billion cubic meters. And what we need is just a mechanism to mitigate the effects of that process. So on your question about technical data and the exchange of data, absolutely. Egypt is more than prepared to have a mechanism that we would have an exchange of data between the main dams in the Blue Nile, particularly the Aswan Dam and the GERD. However, to do that, we need to have a multi-reservoir operation. In fact, throughout the negotiation, as my colleague Hisham Bakhit explained, we proposed a multi-reservoir operation that would create a relationship of cooperation and coordination between the Aswan Dam and the GERD. As part of this process, we proposed to have technical experts from Ethiopia to be stationed at the Aswan Dam, and we would have technical experts from Egypt stationed in the GERD to monitor its operation. And so Ethiopia would monitor the operation of the Aswan Dam, and Egypt would in return also monitor the operation of the GERD. Again, our colleagues in Ethiopia rejected that. And so really, we've tried everything. We've tried every proposal that would build confidence. We talked about an infrastructure fund. We ensured the production of hydropower from the GERD. We proposed that Ethiopian experts would be stationed in the Aswan Dam. But as I said, it takes political will to accept these gestures of goodwill.
And really, thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Madame Helal. And I think that we have other questions, of course. I don't know if you can see them, and there is some of them that you prefer to pick up rather than others. Are all very technical to me.
Okay, so I'm trying to switch over to the comments section.
Exactly.
So that, yeah, you're right. There are a lot of questions. I don't know how many of them we've already addressed. So
the last four or five questions are not punctually. The other ones you have been discussed.
Okay, so the last four. So somebody says not all Sudan and Egypt refuse a second filling if no legally binding agreement before. Honestly, I don't understand what that question means, but as I tried to explain and as I've shown you, the agreement from 2015 clearly says agree on guidelines and filling of the GERD. And on this point, let me say something, I think it's representative of the spirit in the negotiations. Unfortunately, for example, we cannot agree on the name of the document. So we are negotiating a text on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. We can't even agree on the name of the document. For Egypt, we've proposed, I think, the commonsensical name of agreement on the filling and operation of the GERD. Unfortunately, our colleagues in Ethiopia are not willing to accept the word agreement. Right? Think about that for a moment. We want to, the objective is to sign a text, but not to call it an agreement. We are willing to call it agreement on guidelines for the filling and operation rules and guidelines for the filling and operation of the GERD, but we can't even agree on the term. For us, and definitely for Sudan, the text has to be legally binding, and it has to govern the filling and operation of the GERD, and it has to provide adequate mitigation measures to prevent the infliction of significant harm on downstream states. The next question appears to say, as World Bank, EU indicated, we need water sharing agreement first on Blue Nile. Ethiopia wants water for drinking irrigation also. You know, as I started off by saying, of course Ethiopia has a right to utilize the Blue Nile. Of course, I repeatedly mentioned an inalienable right for Ethiopia. This is not a right that Egypt has to recognize. This is a natural right as a co-riparian. And as I was very clear, on the basis of equality of right and community of interest between the peoples of the Nile Basin. Of course, Ethiopia has a right to use the Blue Nile, to use its resources for all kinds of projects, but we need to do so in accordance with the principles of international law, including the principles in the GERD DOP agreement, the 2015 agreement, which says that all of these projects have to be based on equity, reasonableness, and the ensuring that there's no significant harm on downstream states. I think there's another question here about will Egypt use Ethiopia domestic issues on Tigray and border problems with Sudan to exert some leverage on Ethiopia? Let me be very clear on this. Egypt is a responsible partner in Africa. Egypt is a founding state of the Organization of African Unity. It is a founding partner of the African Union. Egypt, you know, as I said, our vision for the Nile Basin is for the Nile to be a foundation of collaboration and cooperation and systemic integration between the three countries. We would never, ever use or exploit any domestic trouble in Ethiopia or anywhere else in Africa to try to, as the person asking the question says, to exert some leverage. For Egypt, that's not our approach. That is not our mentality. That is not the way that we see the future of the Nile Basin. We are invested in Ethiopia's stability. We are invested in Ethiopia's prosperity. There's no question. Why else would we offer and propose a tripartite infrastructure fund? Why? The only reason is it's very simple. For us, the Nile can be a source of cooperation and collaboration. It could be a basis for a dramatic reimagining of the entire region. So we would never ever exploit any kind of internal problems or any kind of regional issues that may be facing any of our co-riparians. That's not who we are, and that's not how we approach relations with our African sisters and brothers.
Wow.
So there's a question from Salvatore Mancuso in Italian, which I would not be able to answer.
No, thank you very much. The question from Salvatore Mancuso was already answered. It was a question more on the regional crisis and the outcomes. On that, I think that either you want to answer even to the latest question, that I will let you conclude.
Sure. So the final question, it seems that this process needs political will. What about the quartet proposed by Egypt and Sudan? So I agree, the process needs political will. And to generate that political will, we need active engagement by the international community. And that's why Sudan proposed and Egypt supported this idea of establishing a quartet. The quartet, and this is very important, the quartet does not displace the African Union process. It supports the African Union process. In fact, the only thing that this quartet does is the following. We are going to transform the role of the current observers in the African Union process into mediators, because the current process is led by the African Union, and the European Union and the United States participate as observers. What we are saying is that the African Union, the European Union, and the United States and the United Nations should join the process as mediators. If we already have two of those parties are part of the process, right? So the US and the European Union are already observers. We've had a very high level representative from the European Union in these talks. And so we're only saying, let those observers act as mediators. That's where the political will can come. That's if the international community demonstrates that it has an interest in ensuring that this agreement is reached. hopefully we can achieve a breakthrough in the next few months. So, Federico?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for the last question. And we also receive, and Mr. Salvatore Mancusi is also thanking for the answer. I think we can close this seminar. Of course, every other question that will come to our channel will be sent through the embassy to you. And thank you very much. Thank you to His Excellency the Ambassador of Egypt in Italy. Thank you for Dr. Mohamed Helai, and thank you for to our President Renzo Rosso for opening up this conference today. Of course, we are open to host other events organized together with the Embassy of Ethiopia and Sudan, as we stated before, has to organize other events together with you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Grazie mille. Grazie mille.
Grazie mille.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you.